Hello, hello, hello. It is great to be back with you. 5 p.m. here, and it is Wednesday, I think, if I don't have my days confused. And it is great to be able to share a bit of time with you and a bit of talk with you. And I've got another two guests that I want to introduce you to in just a moment. That's going to be a great conversation. We're going to be talking about a subject which is a difficult one. All of us know children who act out. All of us know and have met children who clearly have come from very difficult backgrounds. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that, what I'd like to call traumatized lives. And perhaps all of us, we could say, have experienced some degree, some kind of trauma along the life journey because we live in a broken world, in a world that's infested with poor choices and bad decisions, and they spill over into the lives of other people, either the decisions that we make that negatively affect others, or, of course, the decisions that others make that negatively affect us. And so what happens? What happens when we experience trauma? Can we get past it? What are the good things that come from getting past it? And of course, we realize that the most at risk are those who in very, very young years experience trauma. They don't have the words for it. They can't articulate it. They don't know how to process it. And it can lead to life choices and ways of living that we would think look like acting out, as it were. But sometimes these are coping mechanisms. So we are going to be talking about that today. I invite you to stay tuned to the very end. I'm going to share a few thoughts with you from the Word as well. And just great that you've chosen to join us this evening, this afternoon. So my normal little talk, don't forget to find us on YouTube. And of course, when you do, hit that like, that subscribe button, and of course, set the notifications so that you will be told whenever we go live with a broadcast. And of course, a reminder, we have the comment section from Facebook and from YouTube. If you're watching on either platform, be sure to send in your questions and your comments as we go along. Tonight's topic, I think you're going to be interested in, and there should be some good questions and thoughts that are generated from you as the viewers. So do participate through that means. Of course, as I say, you can find us on Facebook, and then we also have a great Instagram channel or page where you can check us out, follow us there, and gain a few spiritual what should we call them? Little inspirational thoughts for every day. So do find us there as well. So tonight I want to introduce you to two very special people, and they're very special because they happen to have a very important ministry, a ministry which takes a special kind of a person, really. They take care of children who have been uplifted and need a place to live, and that can be a very challenging ministry. So I want to introduce you to Dennis and Leanne Brownie. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's great to have you with us.
Good evening, Adrian.
Good to be here, Adrian.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to what you folks are going to share with us tonight. So I guess to get us started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you landed up in this kind of a work?
Well, we're just thinking about that before, Adrian, and I think 2012 was the first time we were involved with formally looking after children. Prior to that time, we'd had our own grandchildren, our own mokopuna to look after, and in my case, my whole professional life had been geared towards the care of children in terms of being a teacher in Christian education.
That's right, because we actually did a live stream with you a few nights ago, didn't we, where you were one of our guests talking about Christian education. So
yes,
that's right.
Yeah.
And caring for your own boys while your daughter studied.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. We had young people in our home as babies while our children studied. So yes, very much involved with caring for children over the years. Mm.
And for me, when I guess my youngest son was born, he's 23. A few years prior to that, just a few years, I learned that I had been fostered as a child, as an 18-month-old, when my mum and dad had split up. There were 6 children at the time. And we were placed as wards of the state, as we were known then. My sister and I went to one home, and my 3 other brothers went to another home, and we were separated for 18 months before our mum and dad got back together. So mum had mental unwellness, and they seemed to sort that out. And I hadn't given it much thought as to what the consequences of that experience might have been until I was 35, and realized that actually that might have some impact on me. And then it wasn't until I started working for an agency called Caring Families Aotearoa, formerly known as Fostering Kids New Zealand, whose main kaupapa, their main purpose is to support caregivers of children who aren't biologically their own, so grandparents, whangai children or families, and non-kin caregivers who put their hands up for state care and protection placements. So that was a bit of a miracle actually to get that job. I remember I was up in Dundee in Darwin when I got the phone call that I'd got this job, and it wasn't until I started, and it was actually the 27th of September, so the end of this month, 4 years ago, that I entered a journey of this thing called DDP, which is dyadic developmental practice. I was trained in that as a response to children who have suffered the trauma of being taken from their family of birth, but also experiencing, what goes with that is their experience of trauma, traumatic lifestyles, and abusive experiences. So, it all seemed to come together, and I had to say that it was God who led me into that. I had health problems at the time, and I couldn't work full time, and so this was a 20-hour position. So it was kind of like hand in glove, really. So I saw that as the Lord. It came to me in 3 different ways. And it's been a real learning curve, a blessing to me personally. And now as a couple, we're able to bless children and families with what we've learned.
That's incredible. And I love that. I love the way that the Lord leads like that and brings it full circle. You'll recall the beginning of the week, we had an interview with Shane Harper, and he told a similar story, right? That also a ward of the state back in the day. And now, it's come full circle, and he's able to give back in a similar way to a young man that lives with him now, and that he regards as his son. So that's pretty incredible, the way God uses our experiences. That sometimes we regret, like, why did I have to go through that? What was the point of that? And God ends up bringing it around to become something that's a blessing to others. I love how the Lord's able to redeem those broken situations, tell us a little bit about what it's actually like having children come into your home, children you don't know, you've never met them before, they come to live with you, I imagine there's some difficult moments. What special skills do you have to do with that, apart from a special heart? Tell us a little bit, like, what's that about? That's like.
It's certainly not a journey for the faint-hearted.
No.
And if you have if your a set of values is in things, don't do it because it's, the number of holes we've had to repair in walls, the number of broken things, etc., is just amazing. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Yes.
It takes a lot of hard work. You have to be very resilient, extremely resilient, and you have to learn to let things go on a regular basis. And you have to be prepared for the unexpected as well. Yeah.
Because I imagine the children that come to you, number one, they're strangers. Number one, they're probably scared out of their little minds. Probably angry.
They can be.
Guard.
Very much on guard.
holding everyone at, distrustful,
Well,
maybe even
it's
a little
interesting.
sly.
Not just a little.
Just a big bit.
But it's interesting, especially if they've had several placements before you. They think they know what you want to hear and see, because that's their survival kit. They suss people out. They're very hypersensitive, hyper alert. They listen to every conversation. What you do need to do is be very observant and watchful of these kids. They flinch at any sound or movement, just depending on what levels of abuse and types of abuse that they've suffered. There's so many gaps in their learning that they don't come with a checklist that says, like your warrant of fitness, these are the things that need healing. So you're focusing on those? No, none of that. You have to observe. You have to listen. You must supervise. You can't leave these children on their own. And we've learned that that's actually one of the greatest tools and healing therapies, I guess, is to stay close.
Yeah.
These kids have been abandoned. They have a strong sense of abandonment. And the mere fact, even if you leave the room to go and grab your keys on your way out the door, and they don't know why you've left so quickly, can throw them off guard.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
And they come in various stages of health as well. We've had children come into our home who have very serious physical problems emanating from lack of proper care and neglect, which are probably too traumatic to talk about on this program, but serious enough to create another anxiety, another trauma for them. And in those cases, we have to focus on healing the body first and getting them into routines where they can sleep. Some of the children that we've had have stayed awake till 10 or 11 and even later at night, too scared to go to sleep. We've had to teach children to actually drink water because they haven't drunk water before in their life that we know of. We've had the first night we had one little boy, we had to take him to the hospital because he got a piece of rice stuck in his gum and his teeth had rotted away. And subsequently had to have extractions. So these children come with not only the trauma of what's happened to them, but the trauma created by neglect.
Their own bodies are their enemy. We had two little guys come and they had the most serious case that our doctor had ever seen of scabies, not scabies, what was that thing? The little insects?
Yeah, scabies.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Scabies.
And they were being treated with some stuff that was actually feeding them. And our doctor just said, throw that away and here's stuff that will work. And the beautiful thing, though, Adrian, with that story that I remember,
It's all right.
that moves me is that with that, because I had to touch their whole bodies twice a day, massaging this stuff because it was everywhere. It was in their ears and every crevice, these bugs. It wasn't just a little patch like our kids might experience if they play in a sandpit at daycare and they come back with a bit of, school sores, we called them. But what that did was they learned to trust me. And yeah, always with Dennis in the room. And that's, I don't know how people do it on their own. We protected each other. I wouldn't allow him to do that because our men are very vulnerable in these roles. So as a woman, I would do that hands-on stuff, but always with him present and with the other child there too, because it was their turn next. And just with such dignity,
Yeah. So
That's
yeah,
But
amazing.
they learn to trust you, and the
Yeah.
love bond comes quicker, even though, you know, they're suffering hideously. Apparently these bugs wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and start gnawing under their skin. Yeah, and so these kids were up at 2 o'clock in the morning, so they might not get to bed till 10. They're up again at 2. But getting on top of that stuff was our first priority, and then good nutrition, because they had not. Some of them didn't even know how to chew. They'd only had noodles and Wheat Bix. So it's pretty eye-opening stuff.
We had one little boy who had problems with his speech, and the speech therapist suggested to us that we give him lots of food that required chewing, like carrot and apple and things, those harder fruits.
Yeah.
And his speech gradually got better and better because the muscles in their jaw were strengthening to the extent that they could actually form words properly. So that's the extent, you know, it's not just about feeding kids, it's giving them the right kind of foods that help every aspect of their physical being.
It blows my mind. I mean, you know, I've met some of the children that you have taken in, that you fostered, and by the time I ever see them, they're already well on their way to being to experiencing healing. But to hear the extent like this, I think, is very eye-opening. I mean, you know, we think of sexual abuse, physical abuse, but to actually hear you paint it like that, it's a whole different level. What some children are living through in this world and in this country, it's actually it's sobering. It's incredible.
And you can't expect children like that to perform well in a classroom or to perform at all, and yet the system insists that
forces them into those scenarios,
into that scenario. And we've been fortunate to be able to work with a school here in town and have children become involved with children who we can offer alternative ways of preparing them for regular classroom interaction.
And so these children will often manifest, I imagine, behaviors that are difficult for people to cope with around about them. I mean, you've mentioned holes in the wall, and that kind of thing. What's that like?
Oh, well, that's not so bad. You can deal with that, but it's making sure that you look underneath your car to make sure there's no child under there, hanging on to the drive shaft before you take off.
That sounds very specific, like like you might have actually experienced that.
Yeah, well, you know, the things like stealing and lying and all of that stuff is to the extreme. It's their defense mechanism. It's their shame shield. You know, the inner workings of all of us. There's an internal working model that tells us who we are, how we are in relationships, and our place in the world. And with good, caring, nurturing parenting, we come out okay, and we're contributors. We're okay, and we have a sense of being loved and being able to love. These kids don't have that in any measure. There's a sense of shame. It's not that just I've done something bad, it's I am bad. And how do you change the inner workings of the soul when they've been damaged to that extent? And the level of nurturing that's required is extreme. You know, you might have a 10-year-old who actually needs to be held because they've never been held like a baby themselves at that age. And these are gaps, these are developmental gaps that can't be just skipped over. You have to go back there and fill those gaps. And it's not always possible. And as they get older, it gets harder, more difficult. You know, we hope and we pray for some of the kids that have been in our care that they find someone to love them in an adult relationship, because that's probably the only way they will gain, be able to have those gaps filled, because we couldn't do it, you know.
The other thing
Yeah.
too is we've had children who have participated in what we would call baby behavior, like playing with Play-Doh, and they might be 10, 11, 12 years of age. And that's sort of other examples of those phases that they've missed out, actually sitting down and doing biscuits out of Play-Doh. That sort of activity. The other thing that's been really great, because we have very close links to iwi here in Northland, a lot of the children have come to us because of those links, and
Right.
to help children find their place amongst their own iwi has been an amazing journey for some too. And we've been involved in taking some of these children on journeys to their marae, to find their marae and to find their people and to talk with them. And that's been a real blessing for everyone involved. Yeah.
And that's that sense of identity that these kids don't have one, because they've been in several homes. They're actually not sure who they are, even their names. If some people can't pronounce their name correctly, especially if they've got a Māori name, and some families can't or won't pronounce their names correctly, they don't actually even know their own name. Which is hideously sad, and we're trying to change that now. But taking them back to their maunga, to their awa, to their people, actually they get a far greater sense of identity. Oh, that's where I'm from. They may not know all of their ancestors or the relationships yet, but if we can find out where at least one of their links is from, they cling to that.
Wow.
And there's an emphasis now to actually do that as caregivers. We're not always given that information. It's only through talking to our kids and my own links into my own taha Māori. So my mother was Māori, and so I have those ancestral links, and just talking to people and making those connections, we can learn where these kids might have come from.
That's incredible.
We've gained a lot of strength with that PACE model that you mentioned earlier, Adrian, that we've used not only with children, but in our work with adults as well, because children grow up and become grown-ups, and they carry with them the same traumas that they had when they're smaller and younger. And that PACE model, which Leanne will talk about, I guess, soon, has been a journey that I personally have learned a lot from.
Well, it's good for us too. It's good for any relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about. It's interesting what you say about children, older children. Having skipped some of the developmental phases, wanting to go back there. It makes me wonder. Adults who are acting out, adults who have experienced trauma. I mean, just because they have now reached a certain age or become adults doesn't mean that they automatically get past those things or those gaps or whatever. No. So, I look at the church that I pastor, the community members we come into contact with oftentimes, and it makes me, the more I've worked with people, the more I've sort of come to think that a lot of what we see as, terrible choices, which of course does bring more suffering upon themselves, etc. Actually, when you really start to have deep conversations in a counseling setting, you start to realize, wow, there's like big trauma that's gone back. They've never spoken about it. It's never been acknowledged. There's real hurt. There's real pain. And of course, we only see the behaviors on the outside. And it can be very off-putting, and we don't know what to do with it, and so on and so forth. But when you really start to dig down deeper, you find there's a lot of trauma at the root cause of that. So it's interesting to me, because I think that the things that you in terms of this PACE model, and I'll ask you to explain what those letters mean in just a moment. But I imagine that there's a lot of crossover, being able to go, well, adults are really just big children, aren't we? And so those skills that you've gained as you've had these children in your home probably are very helpful even to work with adults. So tell us a little bit about PACE. What does that acronym stand for, and how does it factor into the work you do with children, and how it overflows to the work you do in the community with adults even?
So it's an approach that was derived by a guy called Dan Hughes. And it comes from DDP, the Dyadic Developmental Practice, or psychotherapy. So there are various levels of skill in that particular model and practice. And the PACE, very simply, is P is for playfulness. So not just play, but playfulness. A is acceptance. C is curiosity. And E is empathy. So we don't start at P. We would start when we meet a child or are presented with a behavior that's a bit off the wall, takes us by surprise. We begin with A and E, and that's easy to remember because accident and emergency, A and E. But it's acceptance and empathy. So it's observing, like I said earlier, remaining open and engaged. So it's often when these things happen, let's use, for example, a 12-year-old who still hides under the pew at church for his grandparents, and they feel embarrassed. Here's this kid behaving this way. What are my fellow churchgoers going to say? But the approach that we teach is just accept that's who he is right now. That's all he knows. What's happened to that child is the question. So we get curious. That's the C. We get curious about what we're seeing and what's presenting. And so we might say, what's happened to a child to want to do that at this particular time? And I'm sure you can guess. He needs to feel safe. He's feeling unsafe. He's got a sense of anxiety. This is not a place he really wants to be right now.
Yeah,
he's
room full of
strangers. Yeah. I don't belong here. You know, what are the thoughts that will be going on inside that child's mind? And one of the supporting theories around PACE is mind-mindedness. We're always aware of their thinking. What might they say if they could articulate their thoughts right now? And so you become a bit of I don't know if you ever saw a program called The Mentalist.
Yes.
Well, it's the process is called mentalization. So you wonder, and we might wonder out loud, gee, I wonder what's happened to a little guy who needs to hide under a chair every time he goes to church. And you may not confront him with it, but he'll hear you say it. And if you're lucky, he might say, oh, gee, Nan, last time I went into a church, a big man was really scary to me, and I don't feel very safe there. So, that's the hope, that eventually you get to that level of relationship where they can respond in that way. So, of course, the opposite is the fear-based parenting that probably all of us experienced, that, it's punitive. If you don't do that, this happens. For these kids, that won't work because they've been beaten. They've been punished for things that they didn't even know what was wrong or why. They might get a punch, for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
And so for them, asking why is a really stupid question. So I'm sure you've heard there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, in our line of work, why is a really stupid question? Because they can't tell you why. They won't articulate why. And you have to become their investigator.
One of the things that we found we needed to do was to increase children's word power in order for them to learn the right words to articulate what's on their mind. That was really, really important, to increase the vocabulary and use of it.
And you can imagine these kids are not being talked to. They are shouted at. They are talked about. You know, the old adage, children should be seen and not heard. Well, that's how these kids, and most of them are, would rather not see you either. So we don't care where you are. Just, you know, let us do what we want to do as adults. So, yeah, it's fascinating stuff. The acceptance is around just understanding that they've got a story. You don't know what that story is yet, and you're going to love them enough or have enough empathy to sit around, wait around until they're able to tell you that story, whether it's in another behavior or a memory that might come or another trigger. They are very highly sensitive or sensitized. Their sensory perceptions are all over the place. Some of them can't stand light. Some of them can't stand sound. The touch of water on their skin. All you can be left with is to ask yourself the question, what's happened to this child to be this way? And, you know, that's where our Christianity comes in. The compassion.
Yeah.
You talk.
Yeah, one of the, just as an example for some of those things, we've had children in our home who have come to us after some of that process has occurred. And they've said to us, look, nobody has ever told us this stuff. Nobody has ever gone over this stuff with us, let alone, you know, we've never heard of it. We had a young boy come home one day and he wanted to smack everything out of this other kid because he had bullied him by telling him that he was a black such and such. And we had to sit him down and we had to go through a process of analysing what was said and the truth and the lies that were being said to him. And at the end of that time, he realised that there were some things that were true that were being told to him. Yes, he was black. That was true. But a lot of the other things were not true. So he didn't have to worry about that. And he finally understood it, that he didn't have to worry about it. It was more of a comment about the other person than it was about him. But nobody has ever taken a child, many of these children, through that process. So all they can respond to is how they have been treated in the past. And so their first primitive brain, you know, that primitive brain, that non-rational one, is to lash out and do what has been done to them. And that has been something which has happened on a number of occasions in our home where that has happened. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to work with those children and reduce that kind of response.
And see them transformed. You know, for me, that is the scripture, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
For me, and you asked us about a scripture, I guess that's one. That's a really important one for these kids, to see them transformed when they know the truth. But you have to build a relationship with them that they trust. You know, they don't trust people. Why should they? Adults have neglected them, have abused them, have ignored them, have booted them out of their houses. And this is even caregivers who, you know, I don't know. Anyway, you know, some of our children have had between 30 and 90 placements in their childhood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of the important principles that we run our home on with children is that they're exposed to our Christian beliefs. And we don't force them to do that, but we do expect that they will sit and listen to a prayer being said, karakia, before we eat, etc. So we're not there to turn them into church members, but we are there to live the life that Christ wants us to live and to point their minds and their lives to a greater power than what they've been exposed to in their
Yeah.
short lives.
Well, I mean, really, you're just, what you're doing is you're giving them family, and this is what we do in families, right? We
Yeah.
live together as family before Christ, and they get the opportunity to experience that, and hopefully, hopefully they realize that there's some real benefit to it, and that it's a real blessing. So just the P part, because I guess we've covered the A, the C, the E. I can hear the empathy coming through. The P, playfulness. What is that? What is that? How does that work?
Okay, so playfulness, we all know, I hope we all know the power of play and how important it is in our own childhood. I'm sure we can remember our favorite games or the favorite activities we had as children that actually formed our character. For me, it was climbing cliff faces at Portland Quarry, which we were never allowed to do, but we did, and exploring. So I have a very natural exploration part of my personality that I love to do. I love to be out in the great outdoors. A lot of these children haven't experienced play. So as Dennis said earlier, we've made cutout costumes for armor for some 12 and 13-year-olds who had never played costumes before. They'd never dressed up. And even playing cards, the memory cards or little simple puzzles, they'd never seen those, let alone have books read to them. So that's play. But playfulness in this context, when you're, and so this is a model of therapeutic parenting, where as caregivers, we know these children have so few secure attachments with adults in their lives. So actually they have insecure, they have disorderly, ambivalent, and whatever the other one is that's not coming to my mind right now, attachments, if you know anything about attachment theory. But a lot of these kids have no adult in their lives who they can trust enough to be playful with.
Yeah.
And I recall Dennis playing with 3 brothers that we had, and his level of play, of course, is wrestling and judo and all that kind of stuff. They had never had that kind of safe play. These kids were being coached to be gang members, so every play was about fighting and aggression. And so for an adult to play with them and not hurt them was quite a new experience for them.
I must give you an example, though, that did my head in. Leanne got onto an idea which worked for this particular child, which was really good. But she started to sing instructions to him. Will you now go and put your dishes in the kitchen? And I just had to roll my eyes and think, oh, my goodness gracious.
But it worked.
But it worked.
Maybe I'm going to try that at home tonight. Yeah, that's good.
And I'll go and do what you want me to do.
And then we'll do a little dance and a jig, and, we'll do a bump. And so when these kids are
like the sound of music,
life is so serious for these kids, and one of the questions I'll ask kids when they come back from school is, how many angry faces did you see today? How many smiley faces did you see today? Invariably, most of the adults' faces were angry or aggressive and frustrated at them. So for them to see in us a smile, and whether they're behaving well or not, being able to smile at them, and for them to understand that actually that's okay. Even though you're doing this crazy stuff right now, we still love you, and my smile tells you that. But also being able to, like Dennis said, the making light of some tricky situations. These kids don't like to be told anything. They like to be in control. That is one of the expressions of trauma, is that they must control everyone. And you may know some adults who want to control everyone and everything. And invariably it's because they have been controlled throughout their childhood. They've had no choice about anything. And if any sector of our community is that, it's our children and adults who have experienced state care. So they're completely out of control about where they're living, what they wear, what they eat. It's all whatever this household does, I've got to do. So playfulness is about giving them some space to actually breathe and it not all be serious all of the time. And these kids, when they're rupturing, when they're getting upset over goodness knows what, if you start whistling a little tune or just singing a little song, they can't help but laugh or smile at you, and they forget why they were upset because they were triggered by an emotional response rather than a thought. So it's not about what's in their mind, it's about what's going on in their bodies at the time. These kids suffer extreme anxiety. And getting back to my story, that's what I suffered. Panic attacks. I didn't know why. I was always a confident person. I didn't understand why I still suffered this stuff. And then when I learned my own history, my own story, and along with understanding PACE and DDP, I then could understand myself. And I've been able to work now on myself to get rid of that anxiety.
That's
one of the
that's
best.
incredible. That's incredible that it's like the body can remember these things or something like that. Something happens even before we know how to have conscious thought that begins to store these things, and they manifest in some way later in life. And the other thing that you said there that's really great to me is that as you stepped out and learned these things to bless others, you found some of your own healing. Isn't that interesting that when we put ourselves in a line to love other people, we think we're doing them, a service, that God's like, actually, this is part of the recipe that I have for your own.
God's very good like that. My first 4 days as an employee for this agency was like a 4-day therapy session. And I just thought, well, I'm in it, boots and all, bawling in front of these people who knew nothing about me, made myself completely vulnerable, but I wanted the lot. I knew that, well, God is in this because this is touching places I have never been touched before. And that little girl in me, and you talked about big children, adults being big children. We all have a child inside. And some of us, that child is locked emotionally at whatever age we experience the trauma. And it's almost like that emotional self is frozen in time. Until those needs are met, that broken child remains. So that's why it's so important to love God and allow him to love us. Because he only knows those innermost parts of us. Yet here we are with a theory and a model and some skills we can learn to actually ease up that process or support God in that process to touch those places.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the children that we've had have eventually found stuff that they like to do that they become good at. And when those kinds of links are formed in their life, they find purpose and they find a sense of identity and belonging. We've had children who have engaged in different physical activities, and they've made a real contribution to the house, to the home, to the family in a number of different ways. And that's been, they love that. They love that. To see a child work up a sweat on their forehead doing something that they enjoy, it brings that dignity to them that we haven't had in a lot of situations.
We all want to contribute, don't we? And a lot of these kids, they hear what a burden they are, how much hard work they are, and we spend so much time on these kids. And yet when they get to a stage, and we can help them get to a stage of actually contributing to family life, is, for me, that's the greatest reward. Is that no longer are they a burden, they're actually contributing to a household. And that's the cool stuff.
I think we're fortunate to have family members, close family members around us who have accepted these children as well and have supported them on their journey. So they've just brought them in. We've been one whānau together, and we've shared the highs and the lows. But most of all, as a couple, we've been able to rely more and more on God's grace and giving us the strength to do it, because you need to be, and if I can be permitted to use this term, you need to be a tag team.
Yes.
And you need time out. You need to have respite from for an hour or half an hour or whatever it is, and it's a matter
It's
of
exhausting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And my last question, because we're running out of time here, is do you still have contact with these children? I mean, it's been a few years you've been in this. Some of them would have sort of grown up by now. Do you see lasting changes in them? I mean, that must be one of the most rewarding things for you, for the two of you.
And in most cases, no, because the system takes them away.
Doesn't allow us to.
It doesn't allow us
right?
to do that.
Yeah.
But while they have been with us, we have told them that they are part of our whānau, that they're part of us and we're part of them, etc. But we do have one situation at the moment where we have a team approach to the care of one young person, and that has been a model for agencies to look at, and in terms of how it is possible for more than one or two family members working together to form a team for the care and advocacy of one young person. And that's been a real blessing. That's an ongoing situation, and one that we're heavily involved with.
Yeah, love it. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I've been really blessed by this conversation. You've challenged me, shared a few things with me I'm going to have to go and process, even for just life at home with my children. And just really want to thank you. Thank you for your heart for ministry, the love you share with these children, and for being on the very front line of God's healing ministry into lives that would probably otherwise not have much hope at all. So, the stories are heartbreaking, but the fact that God has you there as agents of healing is absolutely fantastic. So praise the Lord for that.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks very much for that, and God bless you and your ministry too.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, I hope that you've been blessed tonight by that story. We've gone a little long on that one, and I think though everything just so worth hearing all of that. And I hope that as parents like me, maybe it's challenged you a little bit. Maybe you're starting to look at your own life and think to yourself, wow, maybe I've got some trauma in the background that I need to deal with. And absolutely, do not hesitate to reach out to somebody that you trust, to reach out to a professional even, and to start a conversation and to start working through some of those things, because Jesus described his ministry as coming so that we could have the abundant life. And although we live in a world that's traumatizing, difficult, dangerous at times, we can still live abundantly when we find our identity in him, and when we're set free from those wounds of the past, and we're able to move forward. I want to share with you in closing two verses that I think summarize this ministry, and many others similarly that are ministries of compassion. And the first one that we find here is in James. It's in the New Testament, chapter 1, verse 26. And it says there very simply that this is pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father, is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, refusing to let the world corrupt you. And I love the fact that pure and genuine religion is captured in that relationship idea, in that being part, reaching out, reaching beyond ourselves, looking for ways in which we can minister to those who are broken, be the voice of justice, of advocacy, as Leanne was saying, and to extend the hand of mercy to those who otherwise they're disadvantaged. They don't have that voice and that ability to represent themselves even. And that's what orphans and widows were in biblical times. They were abandoned by society. They weren't well welfare systems to take care of them. And so in that context, the church here is encouraged to be that for those who are disenfranchised, if you like. The other verse that I want to share with you is found in Micah 6, verse 8. And again, it's in the context of God addressing his own people about their religiosity. And so the question is asked, what can we bring to the Lord? Should we bring in burnt offerings? Should we bow before God Most High with offerings of yearling calves? Should we offer him thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Should we sacrifice our firstborn children even to pay for our sins? And then listen to this response from the Lord. No, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you: to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Do what is right, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So I encourage you with those two verses. I encourage you with the conversation that we've had the privilege of being a part of with Dennis and Leanne. Is there a way in which, in your own household, in your own whānau, is there a way in your own community, in your church context, that you could be the heart of mercy, the hands of Jesus, the feet of Jesus, the voice of Jesus, to have a conversation, to reach out in playfulness, in acceptance, in curiosity, and in empathy, pace? I think as much as that's a sort of a psychological model from the field of psychology, it fits very much with the biblical model, doesn't it? And all truth is God's truth. So is there a way in which we can apply those principles to bring new life, to bring new healing to the people around us? So may you be blessed. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tomorrow night at 5 p.m., we will be live again, and I'm going to be talking with another very, very interesting person that I've been friends with for some time. She is a horse person. And Tori is going to join us, and she's not just some ordinary horse rider. You could almost call her a horse whisperer. She has a profound way of interacting with these giant animals, and she's going to join us tomorrow night and talk about that ministry and the way that she can transpose and what she's learned about people from connecting with horses and the way that one deals with them and so on and so forth. So come and join us tomorrow at 5 o'clock again. If you're a horse person, it's going to be a double blessing. If you're not a horse person, that doesn't matter, because what she's going to share with you is going to be quite profound. So join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Until then, may you be blessed. May you have a fantastic evening and a good night.